The first two producers I covered did most of their work in the 60s and 70s, so for the third one I decided to do one whose work is much more recent. In fact, he is still producing music now. I chose Steve Albini, who was born 22nd of July 1962 in Pasadena in California in the United States. I also considered Rubin and Butch Vig, but decided on Steve partly because of his views on recording and the music industry. I will cover those two in future videos. He started playing bass in high school and played in a few bands in his teenage years. In 1981 he formed the band Big Black and released some records with them. He had a couple of other bands after that. Shellac is apparently still going. The last two releases were in 2014. His first production credits are from 1985, with a bigger band being Urge Overkill's first EP, Strange I... in 1986. On that album he is credited with the name Little Weed. Apparently, in his opinion, putting producers in charge of recording sessions often destroys records, while the role of the recording engineer is to solve problems in capturing the sound of the musicians, not to threaten the artist's control over their product, so he generally likes to be credited as engineer on the music he produces. In 1995, he bought his recording studio, Electrical Audio, after he used his home for a studio, which apparently took over almost all the rooms except the bedroom. He wasn't a fan of digital recording, and so the studio was completely analog until 2007, when it got a Pro Tools rig, which he apparently does not use and even doesn't talk about. He doesn't receive any royalties for anything he records or mixes at his studio. Apparently he initially only charged for his time and allowed his friends and musicians he respected and who were willing to engineer their own recording sessions and bought their own magnetic tape to use his studio for free. He has been quoted a number of times criticizing the music industry, and specifically the major record labels, for financially exploiting and deceiving their artists. In 2004, he estimated that he had engineered the recording of 1,500 albums, mostly by underground musicians. By 2018, his estimate had increased to several thousand. Although much of his work was with independent and more underground artists, he has also worked with a number of more mainstream artists, both modern and some who first had hits a long time ago. One example of these are Cheap Trick, who he produced the single Baby Talk for in 1997, worked with them on the LP Special One in 2003, and produced 2 tracks on the LP Rockford in 2006. Another is the album Walking into Clarksdale in 1998 from Page and Plant, who were members of Led Zeppelin. He also produced the Iggy Pop and the Stooges album Weirdness in 2007. In 1996, he produced the B-52's frontman Fred Schneider's solo album Just Fred. He also has quite a few credits on work from relatively modern, more famous artists. In 1988, he produced Pixies' album Surfer Rosa. He also worked with the Pixies bass player Kim Deal and her band The Breeders on their first album Pod in 1990, and then Title TK in 2002, Mountain Battles in 2008, and All Nerve in 2018. In 1993, he produced Nirvana's album In Utero. After producing their first EP in 1986, he worked with Urge Overkill on 2 albums, Jesus Urge Superstar in 1989 and the Supersonic Storybook in 1991. He produced 4 tracks on the Wedding Present album Bizarro in 1989 and then their albums Sea Monsters in 1991 and El Rey in 2008. He recorded the Manic Street Preachers album Journal for Plague Lovers in 2009. My list of his credits is nowhere near complete, and I try to concentrate on the more interesting work. I am the first to admit that I know very little or nothing about quite a few of the artists he's worked with. If I left out any artists he worked with you feel stand out, please leave a comment with the names and the work. I hope we still get some more great music from Steve in the next few years.